My lord, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble Baroness Lady Hayman, who's taking such a brilliant lead on these issues in your lordship's house. And I thank her for her concentration on biodiversity crisis as well as the climate emergency. And just to reflect on her comments, I hope this is the last time it is up to the House to add in the missing element of climate to a finance bill. And maybe for biodiversity, we can proceed even faster. I would also welcome the news from the noble Baroness about the FCA appointments, although, of course, on the face of the bill, as with Amendment 23, would be better because that would provide a statutory guarantee that such an appointment would continue. So I speak to Amendment 3, 23 and 44, 44 being in my name, Amendment 3 being in the name of the noble Lord Oates and others, and 22 and 23 in the name of the noble Lady Hayman, to which I also attach my name. I'm going to deal with 3, 22 and 23 together. And in doing that, I had cause this morning to reflect back on the work in your lordship's house by a similarly small and dedicated band on the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill. At that team's heart was the noble Baroness Lady Cumberledge, author of a recent review often referred to by her name, but actually titled First Do No Harm. Would it be that we could see the financial sector adopting that principle, but instead they continue to pump out funds into destroying the planet at breakneck speed? A report out this morning showed that the world's biggest 60 banks have provided $3.8 trillion worth of financing for fossil fuels companies since the Paris climate deal in 2015. And that comes from an independent report from a coalition of NGOs. When we look at our home sector, UK bank Barclays provides the most fossil fuel financing among all European banks. The finance provided in 2020 was higher than in 2016 or 2017. Now, the report notes that a commitment to be net zero by 2050 has been made by 17 of the 60 banks, but the report describes these pledges as, quote, dangerously weak, half-baked or vague, end quote. It's clear that self-regulation, however much the government might be wedded ideologically to the idea, has not worked. And we are in an emergency. We can't wait. I quote John Fridgens at Banktrack, part of the coalition behind the report, quote, there exists no pathway towards net zero that does not require dealing with bank finance for the fossil industry, fuel industry, right here and right now, end quote. Now, these amendments don't go that far, but they at least set us on the right track. A track to transparency that doesn't require little-funded NGOs to dig well-buried data out of dark corners. Nonetheless, as others have already noted, we have made some progress since committee, and I welcome the government amendments to this group, which reverse its claim made to me during committee that we didn't need a reference to the climate emergency in this bill. So this will, I believe, after last year's Pension Scheme Act, be the second financial bill to start to acknowledge the truth of donut economics, that the economy, all of human life, has to live within planetary limits, which is where I get to my Amendment 44, addressing biodiversity, which is an addition to the government's amendment requiring the FCA to have regard to the carbon target for 2050 when making Part 9C rules. My amendment simply adds another regard to, in this case, to the UK commitment under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. I referred to planetary limits, and I don't think we're yet focused nearly enough on the fact that the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, 417 parts per million today, is only one way in which we're outside the donut of sustainability. There's also the collapse of the natural world, as the globe's governments have acknowledged with the Convention on Biological Diversity, to which the UK is, of course, a signatory. Now, I'm not at the moment planning to push this amendment to the vote, despite the extreme urgency in this nation that's at the absolute bottom of global biodiversity rankings, in a world in which none of our globally agreed targets on biodiversity are set to be delivered in 2030. The obvious point to do this would be after we have a UK target, And I'm sure the Noble Earl, the Minister, is well aware of the broadly backed NGO-driven push to include a 2030 nature target in the Environment Bill. That would provide an ideal element to include in financial regulation. So what is finance doing to biodiversity? I don't think this is an area that's been nearly well enough discussed, and we haven't got the kind of detailed report that I referred to earlier for the climate emergency, at least that I'm aware of. But if we think about the level of destructive economic activity overall, it isn't hard to think of examples. The operation of industrial scale agriculture monoculture, deforestation and trashing of soils, the production of destructive agri-chemicals and fertilisers, which also have massive carbon implications, the financing of fast fashion, the production of artificial fibres, plastics that will choke our seas and fill our rubbish systems, giant factory ships vacuuming up sea life, and heavy trawlers trashing the seabed, with massive carbon implications also. Financing any of these things and many more economic activities is doing harm, massive harm. And as with climate, as the government has acknowledged to at least a limited degree, regulation is essential. Now, we are slowly making progress, my lords, but the stress has to be on the word slow. It's not nearly fast enough. Amendment 3 from the Noble Lord Oates would be a further step forward. It's needed to improve the immediate response. And should it be pushed to the vote, I can promise the Green Group's backing should the Minister not acknowledge the force of the Noble Lord Oates' arguments. Thank you,